Round already.
This is good to go.
All right. I'll call the meeting to order. Planning Board and Zoning Commission meeting for January 24th, 2024. Can I have roll call?
Yes, sorry about that. Teresa Weisler.
Here.
Sandy?
Yes.
Perfect. And we're going. Jeff,
Here.
Holly,
Here.
and Sue.
Here.
Perfect. Who did I miss?
Marie.
Marie.
Marie, I'm sorry. Marie, I'm so sorry.
And Al.
And Al. Good grief, you guys.
We're here to help you out, so.
I see another post-it in your future.
Yeah.
Oh. You got the roll call,
Yes.
Cody?
Yep.
All right. Next on the agenda is minutes, but I didn't see any minutes. I don't know that we've got any to approve, so.
I haven't seen them yet either.
All right. And actually, we're missing minutes from the meeting before as well, I think.
The December.
December meeting.
19, I think.
All right, so,
Raised hand.
oh, go ahead, Al.
We're missing minutes from about 5 different meetings, and I've talked to the mayor about that, and they were gonna go back in the records and check for priorities, but according to my records, there's about 5 different meetings, the last 2 or 3. Then there's some more historical minutes that I haven't been able to find.
Okay. Yeah, how do we reconcile that? Is that
They're recorded.
Dave?
So, what I had talked to Al about, and actually I'm gonna cast a little darker shadow on it. It looked to me when we went back like there were 3 meetings for the year that actually had minutes. And so what we've done for the time being is they're going back and pulling these recordings and making those available online. Then the issue comes to having somebody sit down and transcribe those, and is it really a transcription or just legally sufficient minutes? And because there's going to be a cost associated with that, the initial understanding, and Al, please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't mean to speak for you, was that getting those recordings up was the most important and the most timely, and then there may be a couple of meetings that come back. We weren't necessarily going to go back and transcribe them unless there was a specific request to transcribe meeting X or meeting Y. Al, is that in line with how you remember the conversation?
Yeah, and the thing about it is I checked with Courtney too, and there's a server file that she kept for miscellaneous things, and we can go back and see what minutes are in those files and what minutes we're missing. That to me would be a good check.
So if I'm understanding that correctly, we believe that there's a possibility that there are some minutes that are not posted to the website but may exist in a secret hidden cache on the server?
There may be, and if the minutes have been approved, they should have that designation. The issue is just going back and chatting with Courtney. I think there's about 5 meetings that I have no record of minutes for. It could be more.
Yeah. So my question, I guess, is it a requirement that we have a copy of the minutes to review and then approve or disapprove or amend? How does that work with the process of just looking at recordings?
And Jeff, if I might, it's just come here in the last few weeks that we've needed to rely on those minutes sometimes when we're going back and reviewing decisions and discussions. And again, like tonight, when we talk about the landscaping at Spires, I have no record or could not find any minutes when we did that CUP.
Okay. Cody, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know that there are some requirements that you can have video, but I think you're required by law to have written minutes on hand for the public to view at any time. So I think I don't know for sure. I think there was, maybe the city had someone on staff last year that was attempting to work through minutes, but maybe that project didn't come to fruition for whatever reason. So I think that's where the backlog began, if I understand the history correctly. But I think you have to have minutes for sure, especially in light of some of the conversations tonight. We know how important they are.
Okay. Yeah, I would think having a written copy, one, for us to refer back to, the other is for the public to be able to access and look at, so.
I will reach out and work with Cody. She may be able to get some information to guide us with what's there. I know, is it Mitzi that was here for like a week and a half, was going to be doing that, and so that was just such a short time, and so I don't know that it ever got picked up after that, so.
Okay. All right, I'll move on then.
If we have to hire somebody to transcribe them, then we have to hire somebody to transcribe them, so that we're legally covered.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Next on the agenda is communications from the board. First is Urban Renewal Agency updates, and really nothing new to report there. The last meeting was December 8th, and that's the one where we reviewed the application for a coffee kiosk and gave tentative approval pending availability of funds and also, I believe, pending approval by the city council. Our next scheduled, we didn't have a meeting in January, and the next scheduled meeting is and every subsequent meeting is the second Monday of the month at 5:30.
Raised hand?
Go ahead, Cody.
Yeah, just a follow-up question. I did have the question from the Bogio's Brew folks, what the process is once the agency has looked at something and approved something like you just recently have. Do you know what the process is, where that goes next, and who gets it on the council agenda? Any follow-up that way?
I'm not that familiar with the process, since it's just kind of a new thing that we're getting into, or that the URD agency is getting into. But my understanding is the URD agency reviews an application. If the project is something that requires review by the planning board, then it comes to the planning board for review and any recommendations or adjustments. And then after that, pending if it's something that the planning board rules on, or then rules its approval, then I guess the next step would be to go before the city council.
Okay.
But
So-
who actually manages that process? I'm assuming it would have been the city staff person, who the
Okay.
planner or whatever would be basically transmitting that information to the planning board, and then subsequently to the council, and then back to planning, to the Urban Renewal Agency.
So would they need a resolution of, you know, or whatever it is? Would that be something that, if it was through the planning board, we would have to advance to council? Or is that something you would do in your role as a council liaison?
It was my understanding that the URD agency makes a recommendation to the city council for the use of funds.
Oh,
Yes.
for the use of funds,
For
sure.
the use of the
Yeah.
funds. This board has already approved the conditional
Right.
use permit. I don't know why it would come back to us
It
to
wouldn't.
approve funds.
Yeah, it wouldn't.
Yeah, it's basically,
Yeah.
the next step is the approval of funds. The only question in the case of this particular application is we don't really know how much is available as far as funds go. And that was one of the things was one of the reasons for the tentative approval by the, URD board, was pending finding out what was actually available as far as TIF funds.
Is that something that the URD agency should have that info ahead of time, or is that something council decides?
No, I think the TIF funds automatic go into an account. I think either the city's account or the county's account. I'm not sure how that's all set up. I'm not a TIF person expert.
Okay,
One didn't know exactly where that is, if it's in the city funds, but,
I haven't seen it come through yet.
well, yeah, there's nothing requested.
Anything else on URD?
The only question I had on the URD is, can the URD funds be used to purchase land for workforce housing?
I don't know.
I don't think that we addressed that at all.
I think if there was a proposal that the URD
Well,
looked at.
Isn't the URD managed, isn't that a federal designation, so you have to go with the federal? I mean, that was why we had to use the areas of blight. We had to use that term blight, it wasn't our choice, but
Right,
in order to get that designation of URD, we had to use blight, so I assume that there are some restrictions on how those funds can be used. And I was wondering whether or not they can be used to purchase land for workforce housing and then lease back to whoever.
Yeah, that's maybe a question more for Cody than for me.
Sure, Cody?
yeah, I don't have that answer, but I can certainly get something back to you.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Any other questions? Anything from, the city council, Sandy?
We had another lovely meeting last night. There were meetings of land use and planning, safety, health, safety, and, public health and safety. The admin, it was interesting on the admin that, if you recall, short-term rentals, the available licenses, 55% went to, property managers, state licensed, and 45% to individuals who operated their own short-term rentals. And where we sit right now is there's only 33 licenses left for the individuals. They only had 3 applicants in November, but it's something that we're going to keep a close eye on to see what's going on. It's just an interesting thing, but Danae is keeping track of that. So that was really interesting to see where that is. Also, everybody has a copy of resolution, it's 3638, to exclude the real property from the city of Red Lodge, to amend the zoning map. The ones that I believe that we looked at last time, for the, property, for Bugue and Langlis. And the question arose that in order for us to amend the zoning map, it could be $400 to $500. And to get Great West to do the paperwork necessary to do that and change all of that, about another $1,000. So the question was going to go to the city attorney, is who's going to pay the $1,500 fee to amend the zoning map by taking that little strip of land out of the city limits. And I think there was another question on it. Let me see if I can find my notes. I know that there was one. You remember what it was, Dave?
I see your hand, Al.
Yeah, two things. Did you say the zoning revision would cost $1,500?
That was an estimate of revising the zoning map itself and then the zoning within the paperwork necessary to de-annex.
The applicant might be willing to pay that. My other question was, I didn't catch the numbers on the short-term rental licensing. You said 55% went to property managers and 45% to individuals. What was the total number there?
Property managers get 55% and individual owners 45%.
Okay, and what was the total number of STR licenses issued?
I don't know if I have that paperwork with me, but all I remember was that there were 33 licenses left available to the individual owners of short-term rentals. So that was just
And that's for the year 2024?
Up until June of this next year, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing that we were talking about with this Langlis land de-annexation was whether or not there were any water rights associated with it, and if so, how would they be handled after the exclusion? So that's just something we did not know. So that was a big topic last night, and that did pass with 2, you can see in blue on the paperwork that was given out with the small changes that the attorney, I believe, put in. So the next process, I'm guessing, comes back to us. So does that sound right, Dave?
There's actually gonna be a meeting, be recognized.
Go ahead, Dave.
There's going to be a meeting on Friday morning with the city attorney and our contract planner to make sure that everybody is in agreement on what the next steps are. Everybody was comfortable with moving forward with just the declaration of intent. But there's some things we want to get worked out before the posting goes in, because there has to be a 20-day posting in the paper. The deadline for that is next week, and so there's a meeting Friday, so we'll hopefully have some more information for you then than what we have now.
Thank you.
Yeah, just on the water rights, my guess is when Country Club Estates was established, if precedent is correct, those water rights were probably transferred to the city. At least that's sort of been a common practice, at least recently. Whether it was back when the Country Club Estates were established, I don't know, but and that goes back to ensuring that the city has water available. It has actually senior water rights available, not. So that may be something that's worth checking.
Considering the piece that is requested to be annexed, it doesn't involve any waterway, frankly. The waterway will remain on Langlis's land, as it did before, so I'm not sure that there's an issue with the water rights,
on that parcel.
what's on that parcel that we're talking about de-annexing. And of course, the other question that we had asked is whether or not we're gonna lose a lot of money for that half acre property tax, which obviously we're not. So that there was a resolution to, that we would move it forward, wherever forward is.
So what effect does that have on zoning?
We would have to.
Well, I know about the map, I guess, in terms of being consistent with the city of Red Lodge's zoning, since the county doesn't really have that much in terms of zoning, and I'm thinking this is kind of a residential area, and I'm thinking particularly in terms of the lighting issue and the fact that Country Club Estates, at least
Right.
based on the input from the Alpine Basin, has been trying to ensure that they don't have light pollution coming off of.
Lights regulations in the county for lighting were turned down.
I'm 3 feet away and I can't hear you guys.
Yeah. As far as I know, this portion of the land goes from Cole to Buge's existing property in the county. There is on two sides of it is Red Lodge Country Club Estates, and there's nothing on that land at all. So I don't think lighting is even a part of it, but we would have to remove the zoning as well from that parcel. So it wouldn't be as simple as de-annexing it, but we'd have to remove the zoning from that as well.
So does that leave it open to commercial industrial use?
It leaves it open to the county to decide.
But it's adjacent, it's right next to residential.
It's right, Nick, it's not, it's not adjacent to
That's
residential.
kind of what I'm getting at a little bit, is that, Country Club Estates is R3, and you're kind of opening that up and, to any kind of development. So I'm just kind of wondering,
Yeah, the langless land would be open for development. I had one.
is the Langless land in the county now?
No.
That's in the city.
It runs along Cole, all the way up to Caribou and along that area there.
And that's all views.
And Buge's is on the other side of that, it backs up to Buge's. I don't know what the CCNRs for that portion says, whether it's single-family home or multifamily. It could be multifamily because of the amount of acreage involved, but it's also very, very damp ground. I know that they have a large parcel on Caribou that's never gonna be built because it's swamp. It's swamp, but the one on the corner there that runs down Cole is another story. I was concerned, obviously Langless is okay with this, the other party is Red Lodge Country Club Estates, and we have it on good authority that they're fine with this de-annexation. So those are the only neighbors to this parcel, is Buge, Langless, and Red Lodge Country Club Estates. And this is, the reason why they're doing this is because that there is a historical driveway across Langless's land to get to Buge's barns, et cetera. And Langless wants it to go away. And the easiest way for it to go away is for Langless to de-annex a portion of his land and go ahead and give it or sell it, I don't know what they're going to do, to Buge. So Langless wants this, Buge wants it. Red Lodge Country Club Estates doesn't seem to have a problem with it.
Because it's the one right across the street from the golf, the shop.
The shop,
Oh,
exactly.
Yeah, I run, well, when I am
Yeah,
running outside.
so it's not,
Yeah, there's nothing there.
there's nothing there now. Langless would be
And
the
it
only
is
one.
swampy, marshy.
Yeah. the
I don't know
land-
what you could build there, actually. There's water everywhere.
Yeah, and Langless did say something about that he was going to run horses on it, so he wants to fence
Yeah.
it.
Just pasture is all you could use it
Yeah,
for.
yeah, it's a half an acre.
I don't know if Al can hear.
Al's got his hand up. Al, go ahead.
Yeah, for clarification now, this de-annexation, do we know what Langley wants to use the property for? I missed that conversation. And is this decision at the council's level with advice from the planning board?
This is just a resolution of intent to exclude the land, but it does come back to the planning board as well. The reason why Langless wants this, Al, is because currently he turns onto Cole Drive and then drives on this dirt road back to his barns, and he's been doing that for 30 years. Langless says, that's my land, and I really don't want that there anymore. And
Okay.
instead, I will give you access to your land off of Cole Drive between the waterway and Red Lodge Country Club Estates, a lot of land there. And so they've come to that conclusion that that would make them both happy. And so that leaves it to the city to de-annex that land so you can actually use it and take the zoning off of it.
Okay, and so once it's de-annexed, if that's the term, then it would come back to the planning board for a zoning designation? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. We would need a zoning change
Okay,
to the map.
okay, thank you. And I think Langless, if there's any cost involved in rezoning maps and things like that, I would think that he would be willing to carry that cost.
Dave has a question.
Go ahead, Dave.
So I was gonna offer some input, thank you for recognition. So there's a couple of terms hearing around that I wanna make sure that we don't get confused. It is, and then I can hopefully add those questions you had on the maps. So the first thing that has to happen is the first thing after this is complete, the city is responsible for providing the county an updated map of that's just the city part. So that part we're clear on. One of the things that Cody's found, and part of the things we're hashing out on Friday is, if the city changes shapes, obviously our zoning maps also need to be updated. Does that need to be done in a timely fashion? Does that not need to be done in a timely fashion? The process of breaking the property apart is one process, and so that really doesn't require de-annexation, and in my mind anyway, and I'm hearing people talking about that. You have to do a boundary reassignment because you can't give away half a piece of land. It is the preference of the receiving party who that is being deeded to have that be part of the county. So that's really what it is just a preference, and I'll sign off on the deal if we can get it in. Going back to the question about the building and the lights, that piece of road is, I don't even think 50 feet wide. So he could already build a shop right up against that and put whatever lights are allowed in the county right now. The extent of how much closer that would move to the city at max would be 50 feet, and that's assuming that's what his position was on that. But so there's two maps. Yes, the city's changed shape. Oh, we have to update our zoning maps behind it. And I think that has a different time frame associated with it.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I mean, we covered a lot at the city council, but those are the things that stick out.
Okay.
And the land use and planning standing committee did not get to the priority list for the planning board. We were going to go ahead and review that. All we really said was that obviously the growth policy and this downtown plan are gonna have to be top of the list. The growth policy takes a long time. We're required to do that every 5 years. And it's going to be first on the agenda for the next land use and planning meeting, which is at 4 o'clock on the same day, on the second It'll be the second, Tuesday in February.
Okay,
And everyone can attend that if you wish.
okay. Marie, anything from the county?
No, nothing to report, no.
Okay. Going on to, new business, on the agenda is a discussion about ADUs and clarification of regulations. Do you want to lead that off, Cody?
Yeah, no problem. So as I mentioned in my email to you guys with the agenda and packet materials, the city was recently approached by a resident. I think this actually came up maybe before, but recently reapproached by a resident who wants to construct an ADU on her property. Single structure, one roof, but with 2 dwelling units under the same roof. The building inspector had some questions on whether that was permissible by definition. Are your definitions clear on, is that an accessory dwelling unit, is that defined as one living unit or one structure? I kind of asked around within a couple of the larger municipalities, because certainly they deal with things on a faster scale than the rest of Montana, and they've had similar issues arise. They haven't really found a path forward on it other than to clean up their language and their zoning regulations, so not super helpful. But it does bring up more question as to, number one, is that an intended or allowed use within the one ADU by right or not? And then, and do you have the defensibility in your regulations to defend that? And then if so, like if it isn't okay, then do you have, do you need to look at conditional use permits depending, like, does this now qualify as multifamily housing? I mean, it just kind of leads down a rabbit hole of many questions of clarity. So Mayor Dave thought it would be a great topic for the board to discuss in a little bit further detail. Not that an answer needs to be formed by any means tonight, but I think if we can move in a direction to find some more clarity, that's the ideal.
Do we know what zone this proposal is in? If it's R3?
I don't. No, nope, I am not sure exactly where the property is. Mayor may know, but I do not. Think you want to be a little bit careful on specifics only because we didn't put it on the agenda that this specific property is what we're going to talk about. So I think we need to stick to kind of more general, if that
Well,
makes sense.
the only reason I ask is because how that question is answered might depend on which zone and it's in. And then, as I was looking at some definitions, the structure that's being described is really, by the definition, is a duplex.
Yeah,
And not a single dwelling. And so whether duplexes aren't allowed in R1 and R2.
right.
Accessory units, dwelling units are, but it's always been my understanding accessory dwelling unit is a single unit, single family type unit. In this case, we're actually talking about 3 units on a parcel of land, which makes it a multi-family, even though it might be 2 separate structures. So that really only fits in R4. So
Right.
I guess where I'm the way I'm looking at it is it's dependent in terms of which zone you're in, whether it's an R4 multifamily or R3 medium density or R1 and R2, which is low density. So that's kind of, I guess, the way I was looking at it. But I'll go around the table and I'll start with you, Al. Go ahead since you have your hand up.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Jeff, in terms of it depends upon what zone it is, whether it's a single, a double, or a multiple. But I think this discussion brings up an issue that we'd identified earlier as the confusion between structure, unit, and dwelling. Sometimes they're used interchangeably in our document. For me, an ADU structure is a single building, 1,200 square feet, I think is the minimum. And depending upon which zone they're in, I wouldn't care how many living units were within that 1,200 feet, square feet. But again, if they're in a zone for a double within that 1,200 square feet, I'm okay. But I think we need to really screw down on clarifying the definition differential between structure, unit, and dwelling.
Okay. Sue?
I'm with him. There could be some other things floating around my brain that haven't settled down yet, but I agree with what Al said, the concerns that he mentioned.
Holly?
Well, I tend to lean towards what you were talking about in terms of the duplex thing. That's what I initially struck me. I think, you know, the idea of 2 units within 1,200 square feet and a principal unit, I mean, basically that's what I have next door to me. There's no parking. The impact is huge on a 75-foot lot.
Marie?
Well, I will say 4 years of Latin are kicking in now. Unit means 1. Duplex, the root of duplex is 2. So by definition, even reading this, this here, it lends to unit inferring 1. So just reading even just the first page of this, I would say that accessory dwelling unit infers one unit of it's pure Latin. Like once you split it up, then it's a duplex. So by definition, we're talking about 1, and I think you could argue that in any court.
Sandy?
Some of the reference materials that we got from Cody, it shows that we have under 4.4.22 that we have 1 per lot. This is the accessory dwelling unit. 1 per lot, not more than 1 ADU guest house can be located on a single lot, tract, or parcel. Then there was a summary of Senate Bill 528, all about ADUs. And it says that we must allow 1 attached, detached, or internal ADU by right on a lot or parcel that contains a single-family dwelling. A single-family dwelling. So if there is a proposal for an ADU that is multifamily, then all bets are off on that. Another point was when we go further into the Senate bill, it has single-family dwelling means a building with 1 or more rooms designed for residential living purposes by 1 household that is detached from any other dwelling unit. So this sounds like they're attached to start with. So I think that the Senate bill kind of covers it, and that maybe we should be more specific in our zoning. Although when it says not more than 1 ADU can be located, that's what it says.
Terese?
I agree. Unit versus duplex is pretty clear. When you read this, it reads as the intention is a single unit in that structure, you know. I think also that it would be handy if we were to add that to the priority list and not lose sight of it and revise parts of our regulations that address it and make it very clear.
Okay. The other comment I was gonna make was that in addition to talking just about, dwelling units and where they're allowed in the various zones, there are also, in each one of the zones, there's also some limitations based on, or some specifications that, based on, for each additional unit on a parcel of land, the square footage of that parcel needs to increase by 1,200 square feet. So, I mean, it isn't just that it's one dwelling ADU, it's, if you're adding 2 units, that means essentially you have to have a lot size that's 2,400 square feet larger than the minimum lot size, according to what we have in our
Yeah.
zoning. So there's 2 requirements there, Cody, that I see that in addition, it equates to the fact that if you have more units on a parcel, you need a larger parcel to accommodate that, and partially to also be consistent with our setbacks.
I just
Go
have
ahead.
one more point. I just wanted to just reinforce it all with the definition of a unit, an individual thing or person regarded as single and complete, but which can also form an individual component of a larger or more complex whole. So if you're talking about a duplex, it just comes back to 1 versus 2. So even if you take it back to the definition of unit, I just don't know what is her argument for to the definition of a unit?
I think it's more the combination or the confusion between some of the conflicting language of, is it unit, is it structure? You know, which of those is that and which definition applies?
And that's understandable because a unit within a principal structure, the dwelling, could be multiple units, but then when you're talking about an ADU, that's one structure, one unit, right? So that is confusing, but we could clarify that.
And we don't have a definition for a unit in our definitions. So we should probably definitely put that in there for luck.
You saw you have a hand?
But, go ahead, Al.
Yeah, I think you've just illustrated what I was talking about, the confusion here. When you read our definitions and you also go to the state legislators' definitions, they talk about the dimensions of a dwelling unit. And I heard the word setback and so forth. And so on the lot, if I understand it correctly, if you have an ADU structure that meets the specifications, setbacks and so forth, and is 1,200 square feet, within that structure, if they were in the proper zone, they could have, in my view, a single STR or a double STR, depending upon what zone they're in. But I think the issue to me is dwelling is pretty straightforward, structure is pretty straightforward, but unit and structure get interchanged quite too much.
Okay.
So Jeff, you're saying if they allow duplexes in that zone, then you go from there, but if they don't allow duplexes, then the ADU would, okay.
It doesn't matter whether it's an
Right.
ADU or it's the principal structure, it's the number of dwellings,
Yeah, as a unit, dwelling unit.
dwelling units.
Yeah, so for R3, where we do allow duplexes as a permitted use, but that's, in that case, a duplex is one structure. In this situation, if it was in R3, you already have one structure. We allow an ADU as another unit, but they want to split it, now that parcel becomes more than 2 units. And the way I would interpret R3, which is medium density, if they want, they would have to go through a conditional use, because in R3, under conditional use, we would review any units greater than 2. So that's kind of the way I would interpret the way our zoning is right now. I wouldn't say that wouldn't be allowed, but it basically, that's the thought process.
Depends on where it is.
Yeah, that's the thought process and logic that I follow. Go ahead, Al.
Do we know what zone that this applicant is writing this letter from? Okay.
No,
Let me ask you this, just to be clear. Do we agree that an ADU structure is a 1,200 square foot structure within, and it's the second building on the lot? Do we agree with that? And if we do agree with that, then do we agree that if that person wanted to have a STR in that structure, that it would depend on the zone in which it's located? Do we agree with that?
well, right now it would be allowed regardless of what zone. The use would be allowed. We're not talking about use here. We're just simply talking about a structure and as an accessory dwelling unit, not
Right.
necessarily how it is used. It could be used as a long-term rental, could be used as a guest house, could be used as an STR.
Correct. All
For
right.
for this discussion, I don't think we have to get into the use
Yeah.
part. I think it's more about what's being proposed as a structure or structure.
What is the what, I'm sorry, of the structure?
What we're discussing, I think, is more or less what's allowed in terms of the structure itself, and whether it is 2 units or a single unit in this
Yeah.
case.
And that would depend on the zone in which it's located. And the other part that's a little bit complicating is now we're in the process of beginning to review those allowed use tables. I'm not sure how many changes that would be made, but the allowed use table is under review.
Yeah, that's when we would discuss the uses, I guess, at that point.
We are or we are not?
That's when we would.
Yeah.
Once it's actually proposed.
Right.
See, I'm
Cody,
not sure, I'm not sure I'm clear on the problem. In other words, ADUs are allowed in certain zones within our city, depending on lot size.
But ADUs are allowed in all of our zones.
Yep.
The question here, why it came up, as I understand it, is in this particular case, instead of a single unit, they wanted to call an ADU or construct an ADU with 2 units in it. And by definition, that then becomes a duplex,
Right.
which then kicks it into, in my mind, a different category, kicks it into, well, it's a duplex, so if it's a duplex, it's allowed in R3 and it's allowed in R4. But if it's on a parcel of land that has already a single dwelling unit, now you've got 3 units on a parcel of land, and that kicks it into conditional use review in R3. And I think it's those are permitted in R4. If it's greater than 4 units in R4, then that kicks it into a conditional use review. And if it's in R1 or 2, it's not allowed.
Sounds like we just need to clarify the number of dwelling units allowed per ADU, and then ADUs, how many allowed per lot, depending on each, which
What-
zone they're in, right?
Yeah, we need to,
And lot size.
it's a accessory dwelling unit,
Right.
not unit.
Right.
Right.
And so we need to just define unit, and, we should be good.
It sounds to me that our current zoning pretty much answers the question.
I believe so.
You have to hunt for it, though, if you're a,
Except for the clarification of the definition, if there is a definition difference between unit and structure. I think we need to clarify that.
Well, one thing we can do if we're gonna clarify definitions is go to the Montana Annotated Code, and there's definitions there for multi-dwelling units and family residences, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. None of those are definitions we currently have in our zoning, so that would be something to bring forward and incorporate into our zoning regulations, I think. That would help clarify.
Mhm.
I guess to me, it would be safe to use the definitions in the Montana Code rather than come up with our own.
Oh, absolutely.
Jeff,
ahead, Al.
would it be appropriate then to assign a committee to research unit definition, dwelling definition, and structure definition in other jurisdictions and come back to us with recommendations based on what they did in their research?
Well, that's something we can talk about, Al. I don't know, how pressing is dealing with this? I guess maybe maybe best to get a sense of that and then kind of bring this conversation back when we look at priorities. Go ahead, Cody.
Yeah, I think we need to come up with an answer for her now. What I'm hearing is unit by definition is one dwelling unit for one single family. And I think that's totally legitimate for where you are right now, but it is something, I think you're gonna have to put it on your agenda for the future of verifying your regulations and cleaning up some of that language around structure versus unit. And then also how many structures are allowed in certain zones versus how many units, if that's the route you want to go. But you need to make it super clear in your regulations. But on top of that, remember too, in 2023, that was the largest land use reform we've seen in years on state statutes. So there's a handful of pieces of your regulations that probably need some evaluating to be compliant with new law. So just know that I think this is part of a bigger picture. It doesn't have to be a massive undertaking, but you are going to have to probably clean up your regulations a little bit too, in other regards.
And Jeff,
Yeah.
if I may, I'm just reading through here. In some parts of what I'm reading through in the Montana, it talks about that the dwelling unit must have the proper siding and fit with the neighborhood and all that kind of stuff. So they're interchanging unit and structure within that particular language.
On the Montana Code?
Yeah.
Okay, go
So-
ahead, Sue.
Well, Al, are you looking at the part where it says a municipality may not require that an accessory dwelling unit match the exterior design, et cetera? Because I haven't found the part that says it would require, just found the part in section 1, item 2, where it says the municipality may not require that the accessory dwelling unit has to have all the stylistic bells and whistles.
Have a lot to change.
You know, here in the Montana Code, Jeff, it says require that necessary dwelling unit match the exterior design, roof pitch, or finishing materials of the single family dwelling. I mean,
No,
that's the
No.
structure.
It's under municipality may not.
But we may not.
The header
Go
says
up
may
to-
not.
See that, Al?
Did you see that, Al, under the?
What's that? I'm
access-
sorry.
Did you see that under the accessory dwelling unit that Cody sent out? I think
Yeah.
I think the legislature struck that requirement out.
Mhm.
Well, it's not struck out on what I have here.
Is that the 2023?
It says 68th Legislator 2023, SB 0528.
Are you on page 1, Al, under section 1, accessory dwelling units regulations, dash restrictions? And then under that, there's B, C, and then 2. 2 says a municipality may not, and A, under 2, says require,
Oh, yeah, okay.
okay.
List of things we may not do.
So section 1, part 2B,
Right.
it's a may not.
But my point is that they're comparing it to, they're describing it as a structure.
Oh,
Okay. Go ahead, Dave.
I have a question, not as mayor, but as the acting planning director. So I just figured out, hey, it's actually appropriate for me to have a conversation. What I'm hearing, so part of it is, we have a request in right now, and I'm looking for direction. And I think as I've listened to this conversation, the direction that I feel comfortable providing, and I welcome, Dave, you're not hearing it right from Cody or from you guys, is there is actually an overlay. There's multiple different requirements that apply. So Brian, as you are looking at this, you're looking at the run requirement that says they're allowed to do it because it is a structure. Yes, that's one checkbox, yes. The second one is, which zone is it in? If it's allowed in a zone that basically that already has a structure on it, now it's a duplex and the parcel is a multi-housing at that point, which limits it, so there's only, so we may have already done it. In addition to that, I heard a third overlay that is, it has to increase, the lot has to be 1,200 feet bigger per dwelling unit. So the reality is, with our existing documentation, if you look at, does this one apply? Then we'll consider it. This one apply? Then we'll consider it. The reality is, there is a situation that it may still be allowed based on the argument, you know, if it's a big lot and it only has one, they might be able to do it. But the likelihood is probably far more that, yes, you're checking one of the boxes, but you must have box A, box B, and box C checked. Is that a fair reading of the guidance I'm hearing from this group?
That would be my interpretation, but I'll let everybody else weigh in.
I believe so. Yeah.
Cody, does that sound sound, or is that a sound thing to go back and say? And it helped because, in fairness, when Brian brought this to me, our only thinking was ADU says it's a structure. It doesn't say it's a single unit or dwelling, but I appreciate Jeff bringing it up. There's another list of requirements that does that. So I think that gives me the guidance to go back and direct our building inspector as far as approval as to, yes, that's one condition, but where is it on the other conditions? And my only concern, and it sounds like if it's multi-unit, it still has to come ultimately to this board to go back in residential, anything more than 2, right?
It's R3
Depending
or
on the zone.
R3 or R4. If it's R1 or R2,
Not an option.
not an option.
Thank you.
So
to
where
kind of-
are we? What's the action item here?
Well, I'll see what everybody else thinks, but I guess my thought right now is to kind of put it on a to-do list and talk about it when we talk about priorities, look at the other priorities. Al, and then I guess the last thing I was gonna say, that this might help if we look at the Montana definitions, where they talk about, so they talk about a duplex as a building, so that's a structure. Triplex is described as a building designed with 3 attached dwelling units. Fourplex is a building designed for 4 attached dwelling units. So they, in their definition, I guess where I'm going is they combine both the idea of a structure and then the number of dwelling units associated with them. So that might help, looking at those definitions might help clarify some of the confusion we have between a dwelling unit and where that applies relative to a structure.
Okay. We'll
Any
put her
other-
on the to-do list.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I'm just thinking this sort of overlaps with what we were doing as an allowed use table committee. We were coming up with definitions and looking at zoning as well because of allowed uses. So maybe we don't need a new committee if we decide to prioritize, but maybe move it into that.
Okay. Well, if there's, Cody, are you satisfied with where we're ending up so far?
Absolutely.
And Dave, I'm gonna move on to the next item was,
Landscaping
there it is. I was looking at the wrong agenda.
plan.
There's landscaping plans, maintenance and replacement. Do you want to lead that off, Cody?
Yeah, again, another inquiry, HOA of the Spires, specifically the cabins or tower townhomes, reached out. They had a landscape plan that was approved as part of their PUD approval back in 2007. They have since found that they need to do some maintenance and replacement of the landscaping. The questions were, must new plantings exactly mirror the design initially submitted and approved? Can they modify the landscaping design without prior approval from the city? Where would they find the code for required number of plantings, et cetera? And do they need to go through any sort of approval process? I tracked down a handful of documents, nothing that was an actual record of decision on the approval. So maybe somebody has that. Sandy was lovely and found some documents she can explain, but I think it just, again, lends to the conversation. We need to give some direction to the Spires HOA, but also it's a bigger conversation of how you're conditioning approvals and the specifics of how you're utilizing some of the requirements in your zoning regs, like design regulations and landscaping plans.
Okay. Sandy?
Well, I have to apologize, Cody. I only pulled the documents on the Nygaard, where they were putting 8 cabin-like structures on 1 acre parcel at the Spires. I will have to go back to my files and see if I have the original for the Spires subdivision. I'm not sure I was on the board then. I know that I've seen a lot of it, but I'm not sure that I'm gonna be able to come up with that either. I don't know, Jeff, if you hoard files that you might be able to go back to 2007.
I wasn't on the board then either, so.
Oh darn, so we're really,
That wasn't either.
I mean, it seems to me that if we approve landscape plans and they find that they weren't compatible, that, sorry, I'm choking, that they should be able to revise the plans, but I think that they need to run them back through us. Not that we're, well, most of us aren't experts on plants. I think Jeff is our go-to guy for plants that will survive in this altitude and weather. But I do think they need to be replaced.
Can I make a comment here? Aren't we just referencing new development, so existing development? If I get a plan and 10 years later that tree died, I wouldn't even think of coming to the planning board to replace that tree. or whatever, like, I'm surprised they even came to you.
But would they replace it with the same tree?
Well, what means do we have to enforce them not using the right, but that tree didn't survive, so I'm just trying to be a realist about
Yeah,
it.
right.
And I was thinking more the massive amount. For instance, with the Nygaard one, there were 8 units, and there was a very nice garden area, and there were bushes in it, and it looked very nice. And what if they all died?
I would replace it as, and I
But
don't know, I
do we
just wouldn't even,
require them to replace
is there
it?
anything on the book
HOA.
saying that?
Would require it. I'm with you. I think the first pass through, yes. They all get their landscape plan approved, and they've chosen the hardiest stuff there is, and up there it's even windier than down here, and nothing survives, and
It's,
but
that's
once
where I
you
live,
have-
yeah.
But once you have an HOA, and they have a separate HOA for each of those little divisions within Aspires, it's up to them
I think
to
it's out of our jurisdiction.
rule
at that
themselves
point.
as to what they're gonna do about it. I don't think it's a city matter.
But it sounds like it's the Spires subdivision, the original Spires.
I think they're
subdivision.
just
required-
asking for,
The Spires subdivision required a separate HOA of Habitat.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah,
What I'm saying is that when Spires was approved, we approved a plat and probably
yeah.
a landscape plan for the entire Spires, not, and within the Spires is
And
going
then they proposed a separate one for their
for each little piece.
HOA, yeah.
But then apparently there's one for the entire group. That seems to be what the question is. Because 2008 is when the original.
Then that's HOA to HOA, that's not
Well,
city.
It's the HOA who's asking.
Well,
I
they
think
better
they're
get
just
their,
looking for they just
Yeah.
don't want the Gestapo to come and be like, hey, you planted the wrong type of, I think they're just seeing what they can do and what they can't do. Like, to me, it's just micro,
laughing at us.
yeah, because you know I'm right, seriously. Let them get what they
Anyway,
want.
I'm with putting it on the HOA to figure out what
Yeah.
to do. That's where I am.
Al, go ahead.
I do not want to be the landscape police. I think that this is not a planning board issue. I think it's an HOA issue. And I think that within our current zoning, 4.5601234 lays out specifications, and the HOA should follow those specifications.
Yeah, I trying to find it. I thought I saw the HOA summarized and basically what it said was, number one, that landscaping meets Red Lodge zoning regulations, which we would have,
Right.
which would have reviewed at the point
I'm
of
just
it.
not, I'm just not
I-
sure why this came before us. To me, it's pretty straightforward, but
I agree. I agree with what everybody is saying here as well. The only thing I'm saying is that the HOA went further in defining what their landscape criteria is, and they even went so far as allowing for xeriscapes. So it isn't just that it has to be a plant, and then in reading through that, there's no indication that a plant has to be replaced by the same thing. So
right.
I think for us, the intent is that we don't have basically weeds and bare ground on lots, that property is just as properly landscaped with appropriate vegetation. I think that's the only thing we really care about, and the city does have a list
Yeah.
of suitable plants for this climate zone.
Put up there on the bench.
I think I'm sorry.
Spires has its own, appendix in the back here, appendix 1-1, and that's all Spires. And it doesn't mention landscape at all.
No, they have their own HOA thing.
So I don't believe that our zoning applies to Spires because they have their own and it's not mentioned.
I say, Cody, to go back to them and tell them, thank you so much for being rule followers, but this is not our problem.
But there's no rule.
Yeah.
Just double check.
Command it back to the lower court.
There might be some issue on the HOA.
Yeah,
That's their problem.
I guess the other question is, goes back to what you were alluding to, Cody, that as you read our zoning regulations, it needs some clarification, so maybe you could sort of help us see where we need to clarify it a little bit more, or not, or have that discussion.
Yeah, when this was brought to me, it seemed pretty straightforward to me too, but it, I'm an overthinker, so it did resonate with me of like, well, you have all these requirements for your design criteria and design review, including landscaping plans. But then where do they go from there? I guess it was more of a theory question, but what is the applicability of those and what is the city's interest in them moving forward? But if you make a determination that, hey, it's not our interest, so then that's pretty clear and easy to move forward with, to set a precedent that way.
When we
on
have,
my priority list, this is probably at the bottom. I mean, we've got other things to deal with.
Yeah.
I will say that in our design review, and it's part, in our conditional use reviews, we have had or have required a landscape plan to be submitted. At that point, we look at what's being submitted and then either make recommendations on some different species based on what they're proposing versus what we think might be more suitable. But once that's approved and gone, then it's up to them to basically maintain the appropriate landscaping. And then that kind of falls back to the city to enforce that. Go ahead, Al.
I mean, I tried to look for notes on this and I couldn't find them, but I'm positive when they came to us with a design review, one of the conditions was they had to meet zoning requirements for landscaping, and they may have suggested some plants at that time that did not fit our current zoning recommendations and regulations. And so we probably commented on that, but as long as they stay within the guidelines of what's in our regulations, the HOA can do what they need to do.
Okay.
And a condition of approval was that they follow the city zoning regulations. And so as long as they stay within that guideline, we're fine. I mean, I don't know why we keep talking about this, but I mean, to me, it's pretty straightforward.
Onward.
Any other comments?
We actually have under our landscaping and our zoning, so this is our zoning, and it says that the standards of the section shall apply to the following types of development: new development, change of use, and conditions. So we don't have anything in here about replacing, so done and done.
Yep.
Perfect. So Mayor Westwood, are you good to have that follow-up conversation with Brian since it landed in your lap first?
I will. I've only been CC'd on things up till now, so I haven't had any conversations, so this is, I will have that follow-up action with Brian.
Okay.
The only question I would ask is just, for my own understanding, is I'm hearing that, and I think it was Al who said the phrase, our conditional use requirement is that you follow the regs. And yet I have been on this board and I've observed this board several times where they have come and said, here's tree X from our regs. And we have come back and said, we really prefer you use tree B from the regs. And I'm here, I think I heard a suggestion, but in my mind, I think there's been times when we've not made it a suggestion. You will use tree B from, and when tree A was submitted and it's also on the list. Am I remembering that wrong, or? have we got a standard, or when is it we tell people what to do with their land? If they're picking option A, that's a viable option, when is it we tell them, no, you have to do option B?
I don't think we've ever required a specific species or group of species. What we have done is, or I guess what I have done is, if I've looked at a list and I've seen some species, I usually throw out a suggestion of an alternative, but I don't ever recall
Never
where,
been a condition.
never
of
make,
approval.
yeah.
With the urban forestry.
Yeah, it's never
And,
been a
and yeah,
condition.
free
of
consultant,
approval.
I'd take all day long. I just, in my mind, it seems like there's been times when we have told them, we want you to do it the way this, and I remember similar conversations on signs and other things where it's like, we're not the sign police, and somebody said, we're not the landscaping police, and so I'm good with that conversation. I'm just filing that away.
Good
you know,
point.
You also can't guarantee that, at any given time of the year, when they're thinking about planting trees, and there may not be anything left in the nurseries, they're looking for a suitable alternative, and it may not be what was recommended. There's a lot of things that come into play, but as long as they're doing one of the big overstories and how many of the understories, and so many shrubs, everything.
And that's in the regs, so we can say
Yeah.
the condition is follow the regs.
Yeah, and it behooves you to follow a recommendation from someone that knows, but you can't make them.
We didn't make it a condition. We've never made plants a condition of approval.
The only thing we might have done is added a requirement to submit a landscape plan, but
Exactly. Submit
that's as far as it's gone.
landscape
Yeah,
plan.
yeah.
Go ahead, Al.
The only thing I really remember that we've talked about vegetation was where there was some concerns of height, and blockage of views and things like that. And, but again, everything's been said, just not everybody said it yet. I'm ready to move on to the next topic.
Beating a dead horse here.
Want us to get off the horse?
Yes.
All right.
I've got a 4.5 hour drive ahead of me tonight, so I'm anxious to get this thing going.
Okay, on to the next topic is, planning board priorities. Ooh. This might take a while.
Oh, my God.
Jeff,
Go
Jeff, you want me to
ahead.
lead off? Yeah. We started this here a number of years ago, and you have in front of you the latest version of, was kind of updated in 11/23. And it's clear to me that it's time now to maybe do an updated one, and put some categories in there and let everybody have their vote. But you'll notice in the lower right-hand corner of what's in front of you, some of the ones that were added after we did our initial survey. And number one on the top is accessory dwelling units, which we discussed earlier today. The airport master plan, which I'm not sure what we have to do with that, but I know we have to review it. Revisiting of outdoor advertising and possible revisit of STRs, and of course, the allowed use tables subcommittee review. Those probably need to be added to the list. And we've already mentioned that the growth policy review is probably a high priority. And another one that we thought was a higher priority was the prohibited use list, as well as the marijuana commercial cultivation review. So what I'm going to suggest is that you allow me to submit a new table with all these various categories on it and let everybody rank them as we did before to see how they fall out. And then I've already submitted this particular one to the mayor and to I think the land use committee has seen it. And I think Sandy referred to the council as well. But again, this is just to let the council know what we think is important, and they'll come back and agree or disagree.
Okay, I was just wondering if it's worth our time just to quickly go down the items under the topics to see if any of those are still relevant, or,
Yeah, if there's something we should scratch off, I'm happy to do that. But again, if we put them on there, somebody thought like the RV park review at one point, that ranked fairly high. But my question is there something we should add other than to what's on this list? You see in the lower left, those things that we've completed. So we take those off, but what's in the lower right and in the main column, they would stay, and I would resubmit that to the board.
so maybe leave it, yeah, just maybe leave the list current and add the things you talked about, Al, plus the growth policy and downtown revitalization plan. But, and
the
that,
state regulations,
what's that?
and the new state regulations.
And new state regulations.
I didn't hear that. What was that?
The new state regulations,
Yeah.
Whatever they've done to it.
so I'll kind of see where people want to go here, but I guess what I'll just throw out is, as I understand it, you would send this back around, Al, and each one of us would rate what we see
Yeah.
as priority,
Right.
then you summarize that,
Yeah.
and then we would submit that list to the council for their concurrence or modification.
I would summarize it, depending upon how quickly you all get them back to me. And then it would be part of an agenda to make sure everybody agrees with the summary. And then once the planning board agrees with what we want to resubmit to the council, that's what we would do. But I didn't hear what Sandy said about government regulations. What is that?
We know that there were new state regulations passed that became active January 1st of this year, and we just need to review those to make sure that our zoning is in line with those. And if we need to change something, I'm sure Cody knows, she's got her little hand up, it's so cute. And the other thing that I have had some work on is when it says RV park camping. Now, are we talking about urban camping like for homeless? Because that's a huge issue in Bozeman, huge.
Yeah.
So maybe we should put the word in there, urban camping, RV park, urban camping.
Okay, that was assumed, but I'll add it. Right. And I'm going to add state regulations review. Is that what you're saying?
I think that we need to just make sure that we're in line with the new state regs.
Okay. And I'm going to add downtown revitalization plan, but that's a working in progress now.
Yeah.
And the downtown revitalization plan is linked to growth policy, is it not, Cody?
They're not, they don't, well, kind of, yes and no. They're under the same grant though. So we're updating them under the same grant funding.
Okay.
And on the
Go ahead.
regulations, it would be, you'd need to look at both your subdivision regulations and your zoning regulations. Because that's where the biggest reforms was in the language of both of those.
Okay. Well, I'll try to get that out to everybody in the next week, Jeff, and then I would ask for your timely ranking.
Okay. I'll
And
go over-
Cody, do you want to be Courtney participated in the ranking last time. Do you want to participate this time?
I don't think so. I think at the effort to save the city some money, no, unless you have a question relating
Okay.
to what's needed.
Okay.
Dave,
And then I would add that the intent is, and I would anticipate this communication would happen through your council member rep, is that information goes back to council and council. The goal, to my understanding, is to avoid the frustration that you guys had last year, where you spent
Right.
a lot of effort on A, B, or C, and then find out that the council hasn't heard about it, doesn't have an interest in it. That's what we're trying to bridge. And so as you guys do your prioritization and offer that as input, in my mind, then your council rep relays that back to the council, who's also a member of that committee. Is that in line with, Jeff's nodding his head, Al, is that in line with how you picture this would work and what our ultimate objective is?
That was the entire intent of this is to make sure that we and the council are on the same page.
Yeah, and ultimately, as the body that approves that, I wouldn't spend effort, if they come, you may come up with something that you say, this is our number one concern, and they may come back and say, yeah, not going there, and that may necessitate a further conversation, but I'm not gonna invest a lot of effort and energy in something that I've been told that's a non-starter.
Right.
What I understand is, what I'll do is, once we get our priority list together, then we'll take it to land use and planning, and then they will go ahead and look through it, maybe add or subtract or reprioritize, and then that will go to city council. So that way you've got 3 groups looking at this and making sure that we've got everything, and hopefully the timing. I think that there's also a timing issue as well. Cody, what is the timing issue that these things have to be completed, especially the downtown?
Yeah, there's not a okay, so let's back up. Kind of multiple things here. If we're talking about regulation updates, there's not a deadline statutorily to bring those into compliance, because essentially the bills are active now. It just cuts down the confusion because all the answers aren't necessarily in your documents as they should be. So, but that's not a like has to be completed right now. It's just a should be for clarity's sake. On the downtown plan and the growth policy, I think the grant expires in March, but in all honesty, they grant extensions. So we're looking at another year, but I don't think we'll need that whole year. We'll request the extension for the year, knowing we'll wrap it up before then.
And to be clear, clearly, we've already kind of made a commitment to, we know we have to do the growth policy. We already starting to work on the revitalization plan. So those are ongoing things that we've already had direction, certainly support from the mayor and the council on. And so these other things would kind of probably fall in behind those, probably.
Okay, is it everybody kind of in agreement with what's being proposed or talked about?
Makes sense.
So we can kind of move on. The only last comment I want to make on the priority list was not all these items, but some of them were brought forward because there were some deficiencies in our current zoning that we needed some clarification on. So,
Right.
So there
Right.
wasn't just us willy-nilly coming up with a list we wanted to work on. There was some rationale behind that. So I just want to pass that on, and that. Okay.
This was not done in a vacuum, that's for sure. I mean, it's all, okay.
Next on is growth policy update discussion. I guess that's you, Cody.
All right. Well, I included in your packet some information. The first couple pages on the growth policy piece is just a really simple flow chart to show you how all these documents talk to each other and how they relate. But most important thing is that by statute, your growth policy, I think we all know this, but I always want to say it for the record, your growth policy is not regulatory, but it does have to support all your regulatory documents. So that means it has to discuss them in some vague detail, which I know is an oxymoron. And it has to reference what you do have in place so that when you move forward with those, they are supported and it shows that you've done your diligence and done your pre-planning and you've had some foresight. You're not shooting from the hip, so to speak. So that's just what those first couple pages are. And then the last few pages is actually just an excerpt of Montana Code Annotated, the growth policy statute, part 6, 76, chapter 1, part 6. But the highlighted portions are the pieces that when Commerce went through this document, how this panned out. Let me back up a little bit. We submitted that grant for the downtown plan, or Courtney did, and Commerce came back and said, we will grant you this money to update your downtown plan because it needs updated. But we've also noticed some deficiencies in your growth policy document, and it's pretty common. This happens in many municipalities. So the highlighted pieces in this document in front of you are the sections that are missing and that just need included. So as part of this growth policy update, we want to make sure we bring that information in. It's very straightforward, so it's not super complicated. But we'll also, of course, update the economic information and data, even though we know as soon as we put data in, it's pretty much old the next day. So I guess my question for you, though, one question I have for you moving forward is, I'd like to prepare a draft for you to start with to work off of, so you're not recreating the wheel and starting from ground zero, because the document you have from 2020 is very good. It just needs a little bit of support in some of these areas that are highlighted, and then some updating to the data pieces. So knowing that, do you like the look of the document you have now, or would you prefer something that's a little more snapshot, maybe less narrative and more specific bullet points? I know that seems like a crazy question, but it's your document, so I would need to know what works best for you.
We do have a lot of narrative in it, and we knocked a lot of it out the last time. We've been, every time we've done it, we've removed narrative, but we probably turned around and added it elsewhere, so. And there are some redundancies in it as well.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I like narrative because that sets context and kind of documentation of what people's thoughts are. Especially descriptive kinds of narrative that, rather just than strict bullets, and then well, what does that mean, you know? So I, that's my perspective. Anybody else want to comment?
I agree. I agree.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll probably.
I like the narrative as well. I've relied on it, particularly if you're not into city regulations and city, a little more explanation is good for me. And I also like what you said earlier about you identifying problem areas within our current growth policy for us to target. Because one of my concerns was the process here. I didn't want to go page 1 to page whatever it is.
No, I don't
But
think.
if you identify problem areas that in your mind, that's a start. Now, we also may see some problem areas that you may or may not agree with. But I think it'll be a good start for you to identify problem areas. I really like that.
Okay.
And also, I like our current format because I'm used to it, and I like the narrative.
Okay, perfect. So I may have to reorganize it a little bit just because we have to add some pieces in, but I'll try to keep it as true to what you have now as possible. So in my mind, a timeline for this is maybe March, April, I have a draft for you that highlights some changes, additions, and then bring that forward in a work session with plenty of time for review ahead of time. And then we can knock out what needs amended, what needs edited. One piece of that, probably the biggest piece, will be you will need to create a list of goals and objectives and an action plan to move forward. And the reason for that, I'm going to be straight up with you, is entirely funding. Well, it's a requirement by statute, but it's also for funding purposes. That's where if you apply for future grants, that's the first place they're going to go to look to see if you've already considered a project as a 5-year action item. So.
And part of this too is when you do identify problem areas, we have some inconsistency with our current growth policy and some of our current documents. We need to clarify those or identify those, and because for me, the growth policy is the go-to document. I don't go to some of those other documents as my first document of reference is the growth policy. Then we go to capitalization plans and all that stuff, but we've seen some inconsistencies there and we need to get those clarified.
Yeah, Yeah, really, your growth policy, your zoning regulations, and your subdivision regulations, and then any ordinances associated should all talk to each other. They should all support each other and say the same
Yeah.
thing. So,
Yeah.
just in different detail, different levels of detail.
Now, in your mind, and I'll ask this question of the board, in your mind, is the growth policy the one policy that we refer to? Or when we're doing zoning, do we need to go back and look at all the other policies that have been done as well? For me, it's just a growth policy, but we've had to reference back to policies dated back in the 1986, for example, and I'm just not sure if that's sufficient. I'd like to have a document that is our go-to support, as you say.
It should be your go-to that doesn't just sit on a shelf. This should be what you, utilize
Yeah,
pretty much daily, but you also have to work off your zoning regulations, and
Yeah.
if they reference other plans or other documents, you do have to bring those in the fold. That's kind of the risk you run, the more plans you have in place, right?
Yeah. Well,
Dave,
those are my thoughts anyway. I don't know if the board agrees with that, but that's what I was thinking.
Mayor, did you have a question for me?
I had a direction for you.
Perfect.
Cause I get to do that. But I'll do it here because I'm sure the planning board is going to agree. As you work on that draft, and I'm very comfortable with you doing that, even though we haven't talked about it, I think we've got I appreciate and have trust and confidence in our relationship, but my ask or direction would be start with a clean copy, meaning that there is zero markup in it, and then mark up every single change you make, so that when it comes to this group in a Word format, there's not something that you changed because you thought it was better and then it gets overlooked and it's not there. So make sure you start with a clean copy and then have 100% markup when it comes to this group. I'm assuming that's in line with this group's, so.
Yeah, I generally provide both, unfortunately, because I'm a detailed girl. So I generally provide two documents, one marked up and one very straightforward.
I just want to make sure that there's a 100% tracking of every
Yeah.
change that's made at eligible.
Absolutely. Yep.
Anybody else have any questions or comments?
What's the plan?
Sandy, Marie, Sandy?
I'm fine. I was just wanted to make sure that our deadline, so you're going to go ahead and do what you have to do to extend the deadline on the grant?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So that puts it out till March of 2025
Yeah.
deadline.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I will say, like, this is just a growth policy update. Like I said, it's not, what you currently have is good. You just need some updating, truly. So this doesn't have to be maybe as intense as the last one, even though there will still be work sessions and public hearings, but you've already got a really good working document to start with, so.
Good to hear.
Marie?
Yeah.
Holly?
Good, good.
Sue? I guess just one comment I had was, I think in our current document, when the last time we did some reviewed it, I think there were sections where we kind of confused goals and objectives, or kind of mixed and matched, and where there's some inconsistency in that format. Some places there's a goals section, and then other places is objectives, and it's kind of,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts about cleaning that up so we have sort of a consistent format that flows all the way through?
Yeah, what I'm learned doing these for other communities and working with Commerce is they like to see your goals, objectives, and action plan as its own called out section in tables. Not it, you can reference those within the other sections in your narratives, but you really need to have a specific place that lists all of those by category. So
So I assume as you go through our document, you'll point out where we need to reinstate that goals section or objective section where we eliminated it, or?
yeah, and I know you already had kind of an action plan that was an addendum to that document. I think that you pulled from 2015, if I'm remembering correctly. And you had goals within your document. So that's likely, again, where we'll start, is I'll include those as part of your draft, and then you have a place to begin working off of those and what you want to take out and what you want to add.
Okay. And then, when you mentioned working groups, what's your thoughts or plan in terms of, involving the public and getting their thoughts and ideas in terms incorporated or capturing those within the goals and objectives?
Yeah, so you're required to have a public hearing, number one, with the planning board, and also a public hearing with town council. And that's kind of later in the process when you've got a more definitive document in front of you or a draft you're more comfortable with. But ahead of that, you're required to have at least one work session. I anticipate more than that in Red Lodge. But I mean, I'm open to whatever you guys think. You know how it is. Generally, people don't show up unless it's something that they're angry about. I mean, we just know that's the reality. So it's a little bit hard to engage people to come into something that's more proactive in thinking, simply because they aren't fired up about it. But I think we do kind of the same thing. We try to advertise, we try to word of mouth. We make the document as accessible as possible online so that if people have plenty of opportunity to review it and attend those work sessions and offer their input. Yeah, and then other than that, I'm open to ideas. So I think we're a little ways out from that still, but it's good to be thinking of.
Okay. Yes, that's all I have. Anybody else, any other comments on that? Yes, next is written correspondence and staff communication.
Down to me.
I had a crazy day.
And then any petitions, communications from the audience, and there's only one person online if they have any thoughts or want to interject some comments. Angela?
No comments. Good conversation, so thank you.
Thanks for joining in.
Dave has something.
Dave?
In the category of staff communication, I shared this at council meeting last night, but I'll share it with you guys directly. I did hear back from and had a conversation with the candidate that we had interviewed at the end of last year. The previous administration had made an offer, and it kind of died on the vine. We didn't hear back. I had left her a couple of voicemail messages. She reached out to me and we had a conversation. I am looking at the at relisting that position. I'm also looking at a couple of possibilities and options on how to use that position to address some of the other needs we have as a city. Think kind of like when Peter Italiano was here, we had a city manager or some of those additional administrative things. I'm eager to get it done. There has been zero doubt that has been one of the sources of a lot of things hitting my inbox and taking up my time. And the relationship with Cody and Great West has kind of developed out of necessity, but as it's doing so, it makes me comfortable enough that I do want to make sure that we do this right. So we'll be revisiting the job description, we'll be reposting that, and assuming we do that, that will have involvement from the planning board. I'll work with your chair and vice chair to do that. But I just wanted to let you know that is the previous, and she would certainly be invited to apply again. Part of the issue was there was problems with the applications last time, and one of the conversations that came up during the interview was that she was aware and familiar with the pay scale and what we were offering, and what do they call that? The post-mortem evaluation of the discussion. One of the things that came out is that she was not aware of that. And so one of the things is if I can modify that job description and justify making that available, but there was a breakdown in the communications as to what we were looking for and able to pay and what she was looking for. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that with you, so that discussion is now starting up again. So I've got a couple of discussions, I'm reaching out to several other cities after speaking with Dan Clark that are similarly staffed and sized and government, set up as what we have, and kind of rebuilding that, again with those changes. So just wanted to share that.
So was it kind of the salary thing? That was the thing that,
I think that was the most significant, was the salary was lower. I think that my guess, and some of this is mind reading, but the candidate we spoke with actually lives in Jackson Hole and works in Teton County in Idaho. So A, they're living in the expensive part, B, they're driving over that pass every day and to the inexpensive part. And I think the assumption of everybody involved in the conversation when they said, you've seen what we're offering and you're okay with that, and she said yes, I get why she might not have, it's always easier to say yes and then turn down the offer later, which is what happened. But I think the assumption was, oh, that's a pleasant surprise, probably because she's living in a much more expensive place, and this would be an upgrade in her job improvement and stuff. And I went into the conversation fully willing to have the conversation of, do we need to just offer you a little bit more money to get you here? And in the course of the conversation, it kind of felt like that delta was, even though it wasn't specifically articulated, it was kind of like, my guess is you're not going to come close enough, so let's approach this from a different angle. Having said that, as we talked, she definitely expressed an interest in being invited to apply again when we get that posted. But I just want to make sure, I in retrospect, I think I felt it at the time, I think I know it got posted in a hurry. The initial job description said planning director, and the job description said public works director, and then people couldn't apply online. So there were 2 or 3 issues, and it's like tying a knot. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. If you're trying to tie a knot and it's not working, slow down. Yeah.
Al has his little hand up.
Go ahead,
Dave,
Al.
did I hear you say you're gonna re-advertise, and in what time frame?
I am gonna re-advertise. I would expect within 30 days, but the job description is likely going to change from what it was last time, which is why it's gonna take a little time to
Right.
repost. And I will not do that without reaching out and coordinating with you as chair of the planning board.
Okay, and have you done, or will you do a salary review on what is the going rate for people in the position that you are advertising for?
That is absolutely going to be part of the process.
Yeah.
But having said that, I welcome the input, and anybody else who wants to make that input to do ideas, I'm open to input from input.
And again, just to make, I'm sure I'm clear, you're thinking that this person would either grow into or share some administrative positions within the city?
I'm looking at that possibility, yes.
And the only thing I would say is that puts a pretty good load on them in terms of just being a planning director is probably a 60-hour-a-week job, and whatever the administrator is. So that'd have to be a pretty special person that could wear 2 hats.
Or we continue utilizing our staff augmenting that we have with Great West, which is also a position.
Yeah.
It turns out, in talking with 2 or 3 different planning directors, that city manager is actually kind of that career path development. A lot of them will come up, they'll go through planning directors, and then they'll go get some public works experience, and they'll kind of get out, and then they kind of, that city planner is kind of the #1 feeding into city manager in the experience and the research that I've done and the conversations I've had. So I agree that it's a special person, and then giving up those, but if we can get them up to 60, maybe we can get me down from 80.
Okay, well, appreciate the effort. Thank you.
Anybody else have any comments about that, or where we're going, or where Dave's suggesting going?
Or any inputs that you want me to take into account, like I said.
Okay, this one is probably obvious to you and you've already thought about it, but One of the things that struck me about the candidate that had applied is it seemed to me they had in their current job, they had a lot of the same issues that we have here. And to me, that's kind of a plus mark, and if that could be something that's considered when you're reviewing applications that come in.
Thank you for the input.
Anybody else? Al, are you good?
I'm good, thank you.
All right, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Oh.
Hey, hurry.
Marie's like, yeah.
You can see my background there. You can see what I'll be doing in the next few minutes.